So we all know that the world is getting more and more issues handed to it day in and day out, and that the worst thing we can do is contribute to those pollutants. That being said, today I would like to talk about electronic waste, especially going into the Christmas season where we're creating more and more of it, where we're buying our families and loved ones the newest Apple product or what have you. And so I think this would be a really interesting little video to cover prior to the semester being done. So we all depend on our phones every single day of our life, even the most environmentally conscious and friendly people. If you're living on the grid, you most likely have a phone. I have a phone. I'm filming on a phone, and I have a computer as well. We're all creating electronic waste of some sort. But the average person spends a lot of time on their phone, some even up to 8 hours a day, which is more than you're supposed to be sleeping. So that's pretty substantial. And what that does in turn is it drains your phone battery, and then it leads you to buy a new phone instead of replacing your battery, which is convoluted, unnecessary, and not environmentally friendly. It is important to be conscious when you're making decisions to buy new electronic waste, because when you get rid of your phone or your computer or your iPad or what have you, you're harming somebody else's life, is what it comes down to. And your own, because we all live in a globe, and the pollutants in China and in Hong Kong and India still come here in the US, we're not getting rid of them. So I like to kind of single out the iPhone because the most research has been done on the Apple iPhone products in terms of their environmental waste. The iPhone brought us into the modern times with every gadget and app and every good thing we could possibly think of, right? But they also contribute a lot of carbon to the atmosphere. And though they create our lives, they're also one of the first things diminishing our lives and decreasing our lifespans. First and foremost, I would like to acknowledge that the iPhone is not manufactured in the USA. Even though parts of it are, most of it is done overseas, and there's billions of maps on this tracing iPhone parts and Boeing parts from the airplane, the famous environmental graph, There's a lot of information about this, but blank slate, they're not made here. Even if they're sold here, they're not made here. So most of them are made in China, as is expected for any brand, really, nowadays. And this is because a lot of the computer parts and the A6 and A7 chips that are in iPhones and so many other circuit boards and stuff are made in China because they have a highly tech-built industry. Also, on over 85% of the phones, the screens are actually installed in China as well. When discussing this, we need to realize, first and foremost, that production of any inland commodity overseas is never a good thing. It is bad for the environment, it's bad for the people that are dealing with our waste and their poor manufacturing practices, and it's also bad for the American jobs that our government so fondly wants to create more of. That being said, in the case that we're in right now, if Apple were to reshore the production of the iPhone alone, it would cost upwards of $600 million. And that's just for the iPhone, not any of their other products, not their desktops, their laptops, their iPads, none of it. And it would increase the tax on your iPhone a lot, which would make it more expensive. And let's face it, they're already too expensive for what they are. Also, when researching this, the most interesting thing that popped up was that a tech company that was reviewing the iPhone making process claimed that if they were to reshore just the iPhone, the US would not have the sheer capacity to deal with it, citing a case when they needed something changed on the iPhone 7, and the US was like, nope, we can never fix this. We can never make this many in this amount of time. And China was like, yep, we'll do it in a night. One night. They did what the United States can do in weeks. And that being said, it just kind of concretes our dependency on exploitation of people overseas. Even if we still feel like we're paying too much for our phone, it is a grave humanitarian disaster. It's a bad situation no matter how you look at it, because it's either going to cost us more or it's going to cost them their health. And us our health, but in like a long-term spirally kind of way. Depending on what iPhone you have, the environmental cost of it is different. They found that with the larger iPhones, which just makes a lot of sense if you think about it, But in the larger iPhones, they're actually creating more and more carbon and other greenhouse gases. The newer and bigger and better is not always bigger and better when you're looking at the environmental aspects of it. The newer and larger your phone is, the more greenhouse gases and other environmental pollutants it creates. The iPhone alone creates anywhere from 50 to 110 kilograms of CO2, which is the equivalent of burning through about 4 to 12 gallons of gasoline, which in hindsight doesn't seem like a lot, but it kind of is. Is it really worth buying a new one every year? The most environmental harm in the creation of an iPhone or any technological device is going to happen when it's first created. Same thing with a car. You know, we see the most manufacturing and the most metals and, you know, the precious metals that are in cars and phones and the all the resources and natural material and gas that is needed to produce an iPhone or a car or a laptop or anything else along those lines is going to be the most environmentally damaging up front. That being said, the iPhone in particular has gotten a lot greener in some senses. Though they are creating more carbon in their production, even in the newer models, they're using less awful ingredients. So the original iPhones created a lot more environmental and health damage because of the metals and chemicals that were used in the creation of them. These chemicals included beryllium, lead, mercury, and even benzene and N-hexene, which are directly linked to leukemia and nerve damage. So that being said, we just can't win, no matter whether we're using better ingredients in the production of our smartphones or using smaller screens or larger screens as the world is going now. It's still a massive environmental hit. To sum up that first little section there, if you can keep your phone for longer, that's better. Because the creation of a new phone is where most of the chemicals and CO2 and other harmful greenhouse gases are being produced. And so if you can just replace your battery instead of buying the newest phone, that would be your better way of doing it. And if you're like me and constantly have technological problems with your cell phone, you can just go in and say, hey, it's not working. Please make it work, instead of buying a new phone. Because even though it might be taxing and stressful, it's still worth it in the long run. So this is the part of the video that's really interesting, and it's about e-waste. So what is e-waste? What happens to it and what creates it? E-waste is all of the electronic waste that cannot be put into normal trash, even though people still do that and it's not good. And so a lot of the times there's special dump sites where you can bring your computers, TVs, phones, all that good stuff, and they will dispose of it. How much is there, you ask? Great question. Too much. Actual answer? There is over 20 million tons of e-waste scattered around the world, and most of it is coming from the United States because of our constant need to upgrade. So actually in recent times, Apple created this robot that sorts out and pieces apart their old iPhones that are recycled, and they actually recycle them. Crazy, right? The unfortunate thing is there's one robot and it can only disassemble 1.2 million iPhones every year, which is far less than what America alone disposes of every year. That being said, a lot of e-waste is shipped to where? We don't really know. In 2019, research showed that electronic waste was the fastest growing source of waste in the world. And in saying that, about 50,000 dump trucks every year, full to the brim, are brought to recyclables. But most of them don't actually get recycled by these Apple robots or reused to make new phones. They get shipped overseas. And knowing that the whole recycling fad was too good to be true, a team in Seattle tagged 200 electronic items that were deemed recyclable and brought them to eco dump sites. So these are sites that you're supposed to bring your electronics to when you're done with them. Then they will be recycled in an environmentally friendly way. These items were tracked to so many places, and some of them were over 12,000 miles away. Most of them, however, ended up in Mexico, China, Pakistan, Taiwan, Thailand, the Dominican Republic, Canada, and Kenya. The most frequented, though, was Hong Kong, and not just any Hong Kong, but rural Hong Kong. There's an area in China that was one of the most frequented sites for electronic waste dumping, and in 2001, that's so many years ago, it was exposed in a film called Exporting Harm, the high-tech trashing of Asia. And this was at a time prior to Hong Kong being the largest e-waste site. And in this time, this was the largest graveyard. The worst thing about this, in this documentary, there was footage shown that the people that were working there, and this might be the biggest problem of it all, is that they didn't know what they were exposing themselves to. They were disposing and trashing of these electronics without knowing the hazardous conditions that they were putting themselves into. These employees would dissolve circuit boards over coal-fired grills. They would burn plastic casings off of wires to extract copper. They would even go as far as soaking computer chips in hydrochloric acid so that they could obtain the gold from them. These practices obviously led to horrible environmental degradation and horrible health side effects at the cost of getting a little bit of gold and copper. After the film was sent out to the world, further research was done on the area, and it was found that it had one of the highest levels of cancer-causing dioxins in the world. And this site was smaller than the ones that we see in Hong Kong now, so that's saying something. We're putting them in a really bad position. Not only are these people being forced to destroy electronics that are poisoning them, but on top of it, there's been a lot of fires that have broken out at these graveyards for electronic waste. And we can all only imagine the amount of environmental harm that does, and the increasing levels of health side effects that would cause for the people in that area. Overall, the use of electronics from the creation of them to the daily hours spent on them is a cycle of waste and environmental harm, whether we're thinking about it or not. So next time you go out to buy a new phone, whether it's for you or a family member this Christmas, maybe consider the environmental harm and humanitarian crises that you're causing all over the world before you do that. The main point of this is that you should be keeping your electronics for as long as you possibly can to show that you're caring of the environment and you understand the impacts that wasting away electronics has on the environment and on people that are overseas and have no clue what they're dealing with. So please be a conscious consumer and think before you buy, especially before buying your next expensive computer with a fancy touch bar that is probably going to kill somebody's family. On that note, have a great rest of your year.